users perhaps to circumvent digital locks. That's a derogation of the powers or the rights that copyright holders have. And so we have to be very careful as we move in that direction that we do so in a measured way, which is again why the minister's power to regulate allows us to adapt to the changing environment and to learn from the experience going forward. I'm quite confident that the minister, whoever it might be going forward, is going to act very reasonably in ensuring that users have access to fair dealing and, if required, are able to circumvent to do so. But we want to make sure that the copyright holders also have the ability to enforce their copyrights. I mean, that is the starting point, is defending private property which is found in copyright. And so again, when we're trying to find that balance, it's usually a quid pro quo, goes both ways. There are many creators who are saying that balance has been shifting very much in favor of the users and very little going back to the creators. So I just want to leave that with you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fast. We'll now move to the second round of questioning, be a 5-minute round. And for the Liberal Party, we have Mr. Rodriguez. And I understand you're going to split your time with Mr. McKay.
Yes, I will try to. But first of all, I have to say that it's a bit sad to see that Mr. Fast took some time of this important committee to make some partisan comments. If I wanted to make some partisan comments, I would remind him that in 2005 we had a very good bill that was brought down when the coalition, the NDP bloc and Conservative coalition brought down the government. If I wanted to be partisan, I would also remind him that there was another bill in 2008 and that died because the Conservative government called an election. And if I was partisan, I would remind him that it's been 2 years and something now that they were elected, including prorogation, of course, because we have to remind them of that. So if this has been delayed, it's certainly not because of the Liberal Party, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chair. You know that very well.
Right.
Now, to our guest, bonjour. Just thanks for being here.
Given the important link between you and Access Copyright, what is your relationship currently between you and them?
I'm going to. Our relationship will stay the same with these amendments. I will have that further clarified, though, by our legal counsel. If you would need any further comments on that.
My understanding is that there's currently a case between you and Access Copyright. Correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't come to an agreement on the amounts per student, the rates. You did not come to an agreement, and therefore you went before the Copyright Board, which came and decided on a new rate on which you do not agree, and you appealed that case, and the court, I believe, supported Access Copyright and supported and maintained the rate, and now you want to go to Supreme Court, if I'm not mistaken. So currently, there's a court case regarding the rates. Am I correct in saying that?
And I will have Wanda answer that for you.
Yes, the answer to your question is yes. A leave application has been filed with the Supreme Court of Canada to hear a very narrow issue that comes from that case. And it's not all of it, it's a small part, but the principle is very important. And that principle is, can a teacher make a copy for students in his or her class? Now, I'm going to take 2 minutes because I think from a policy perspective this is really important. The case law in the Federal Court of Appeals says that an online music seller can stream music to a prospective customer, and that's fair.
Mais je peux pas, je m'excuse parce que j'ai 5 minutes au total.
I apologize, only have 5 seconds. I'd like to know what happens to the money collected in the meantime, the money that has to be collected for the copyright during that dispute. Is it redistributed to creators, to authors, or is it kept in trust?
to Access Copyright.
OK. Est-ce que Access Copyright peut le verser?
And Access Copyright channel that to creators, or does it have to keep it so long as the dispute is going on?
Answer that because I don't know what the internal accounting rules are in that corporation.
OK. Moi, de ce que je comprends, c'est que ça pénalise.
My understanding is that it penalizes authors. Given that you're appealing the case, the money has to be kept. Has to be set aside. I have to end there because I promised my colleague I'd leave him some time.
That's an answer to the question. Thank you for being here. Your current appeal from the Federal Court of Appeal, which found that the tariff, the rate was in fact correct, has led you to more than talking about just money. You've said this is not about money. Your appeal suggests that, quote, the current law of interpretation of fair dealing is confusing and unclear. Am I to take it that the six-step test of the Supreme Court of Canada and CCH is not acceptable? Are you looking for something free here that you wouldn't otherwise get, say, in snow plowing contracts, or free, looking for free computers? I'm confused by the position taken by your organization. It sounds to me that you would prefer to obtain things for free that would otherwise respect some of the property rights that Mr. Fast had alluded to a little earlier.
No,
Madam Minister?
No, that would be misconception. We're not asking for anything for free. The education system, the sector, pays for licenses, copyright, and will continue to do so. What we're asking for with these amendments is to make things clear, things clarified. There's a silence.
Well, I'm asking you that is in fact, and I'm sorry to disturb you because we probably have just seconds, are the factors enumerated in CCH sufficient? You're looking for fairness here, but it seems to me that's already well defined. Are you quibbling with that decision? And if you are not quibbling with that decision, I'm trying to find out why you're appealing a decision by the Federal Court of Appeal.
I will have one to answer that particular question.
We are asking the Supreme Court to interpret the second step in the CCH case, what is fair, using those 6 factors. The Federal Court of Appeal has established a hard and fast rule that a teacher who copies for students in his or her class, it's not fair, period. And we think as a matter of public policy that's not in keeping with the spirit.
So you say there's no clarity. Yeah, CCH
exactly.
does not provide you the clarity that you're looking for.
Well,
okay, thank you very much. We're going to have to move on.
Yeah.
Merci, Pablo.
Monsieur Cardin, pour 5 minutes.
Merci.
Cardin at 5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ladies, good morning. Welcome. As you know, protecting copyright is important to us. We would have liked to have a bill that does indeed protect copyright as well properly serving the educational community. But of course, their budget was so lacking that we cannot continue our work here, unfortunately. If I understood correctly in your opening remarks, you talked to us about an amount spent with regard to copyright and licenses, close to $1 billion spent in Canada with regard to copyright.
Have Rosalind expound upon that.
Yes, the reference I made earlier was our estimation is it's probably in the vicinity of $1 billion across Canada, which would include what the educational sector would spend on buying either outright a work, whether it be a book or a movie or a piece of art, or paying for the use of one of those things.
As my colleague said earlier, at the National Assembly, which is against Bill C-32, as tabled in the House of Commons, the National Assembly has concerns with regard to the loss of income for creators and authors. And in that sense, you said that your organization showed some openness, and there were discussions underway with Quebec. And that said, in your opinion, is Quebec going down the wrong path? Is the Department of Education in Quebec going down the wrong path in that it is expecting a loss of income for creators and authors?
I feel there's a misconception about a loss of revenue for authors and for the creative community. What we're seeking, the ministers of education from CMAC are seeking to have the copyright, the amendments in here so that there's clarification, and that will not impact on any of the revenues that any of our creative people will receive. That would stay the same. There's no loss of income for this. We're asking for this to have for clarity. At this point, there's no clarity in that for what teachers can and professors can do within their classroom. And also, you have to also look at what students can and cannot use within their assignments and their reports. So that's what we're asking for.
La Conférence canadienne des arts.
The Canadian Arts Conference was presenting us the economic impacts of Bill C-32 on artists and other copyright holders. Talked about $126 million. That might appear insignificant with regard to $1 billion. But, I mean, it's still quite significant. With regard to the education exemption and the fair dealing, they're talking about an amount of $41.4 million in potential losses based only on what has already been paid and not what could become payable according to the rules and laws currently in effect, but it could increase in the future. You're saying that there will be no loss of revenue for authors, for creators, for collective license organizations. And when you have such an organization which comes to such an estimate, which is perhaps extremely accurate, it could be more, it could be less, but I mean, it seems that there will be potential losses of close to $41 million in terms of fair dealing in education. But you're sticking to your position and saying that there will not be any losses in terms of copyright?
I'm saying with a very firm commitment there will be no loss of revenue for for people that are in the creative economy. The claims that you have brought forward, I feel, are groundless, and that we've looked at this very carefully. We're not asking for anything for free. We're asking for clarity. That is what this is, why we're here today.
Mais quand on voit $1 milliard de dollars.
Now, you say $1 billion is a lot of money. I mean, it could be tempting. I mean, because, I mean, there are budgetary constraints everywhere. You're a minister. You must be tempted sometimes to say that, well, $1 billion is a lot of money. Perhaps we should find a way to reduce that amount. And if you can find a way to reduce that amount, perhaps it could be by amending certain copyright provisions.
Looking in any way of making any savings. We are asking for clarity. At this point, teachers and students and professors are having difficulty knowing what they can and what they cannot do. Society has changed, technology has changed, and the Copyright Act hasn't kept in keeping with the new reality. So we're seeking clarity. There will be no loss of revenue. The claims that you brought forward are misconceptions. So you say about making efficient use of our money, it's definitely not in any way would we be impacting on anyone that would be making their living at creating materials, creating art, creating music. That is not any part of this. It's what we're here for is to make sure that there's clarity.
Thank you very much. We'll move to Mr. Del Mastro for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses today for appearing. Minister, first question, it has nothing to do with copyright, but I am the PS to Heritage. How is the Pier 21 National Museum coming along in Halifax? Oh,
I'm telling you, that is absolutely wonderful. There's so much there are many wonderful things happening at Pier 21, and the excitement around that being named a national museum is much appreciated, and Ruth Goldblum is, bless her heart, is dancing.
I can't wait to, my grandparents arrived at Pier 21. I can't wait to visit it once it's completed. So that's great news. On copyright, first of all, thank you very much for appearing today. I think it's very important. I think you're right to seek clarity. We've heard an awful lot of witnesses, and you know, I think this has been part of the challenge that we've had, and there is I suppose, a suspicion, perhaps is the best way of putting it, a lack of trust amongst the creative groups, certainly authors. We had an author appearing last week that indicated that her feeling was that you would be taking them to court to seek to eliminate revenues that they are currently seeing. We've heard no such things. Have your school boards or your teachers or have you yourself ever indicated to anyone that you're not going to have to pay any more for creative works to anyone? Or have you heard any of the provincial ministers indicate that they feel that this education fair dealing exemption means that they will not have to pay any more for copyrighted works?
No, there has been no discussion about that at all. This is everything to do about seeking balance and to make sure that it's clear. At this time. It's very difficult in the education system to operate not knowing. And just on that point, I know that we don't have much time left, but I know that I've been in the Department of Education as a teacher for many years, and there's been many examples that I could provide myself about not knowing if I can use something in the classroom and not having anyone be able to answer that question. But I'm going to just ask the Deputy to also give example to what's happening at the Department of Education in Nova Scotia around the lack of clarity.
Sure.
Thank you, Minister. I guess I would comment that we not infrequently have people within the province asking us what the rules are. What can we do? What can we not do? And we don't have a clear answer for them. And I guess what we're saying here today is that this bill is about allowing teachers and students to fairly use materials and works and to harness technology while respecting the rights of creators and not preventing them from earning money from their creations or controlling their use to the extent that they may wish to. And we want to have clear answers for the education sector.
Yeah. I've always said that it's about, and I've met with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of groups on copyright since 2008. I've always said it's about defining the boundaries. Once people know what's legal and what's not legal, especially, you know, educational facilities and ministries and provincial governments and so forth, they're going to do what's legal. The overwhelming majority of Canadians follow the law. We know that. So I appreciate that, and I do think clarity is important. What I wanted to ask you, Minister, is one of the things that excites me is where education is going and how technology is really going to benefit education, some of the new innovations that we see. One of the things about including education for fair dealing is that it allows some flexibility. It allows, for example, electronic boards, things that are on the internet and so forth. Those should be incorporated as fair dealing in the classroom. I see a time when perhaps textbooks aren't the medium that we actually convey learning with. It may well be through digital devices, iPads, who knows. But I'm very excited, and I want to allow for that innovation to occur. Is that something that your government supports and something that you see happening in education, innovation with technology?
Oh, absolutely. We're moving in that direction. It's mind-boggling to see how far we've come in such a short amount of time in terms of technology and what the classroom looks like. We have 5-year-olds that come to school now that know more about computers than I did when I first started teaching. And now, mind you, I have taken many courses to bring myself up to speed, but it's part of who we are now in our society, that technology and the changes of technology are part of who we are, because what we're using today could be very much different in 5 years from now, because as you know, each and every year there's something new that comes on board, and the education system has to be right at the cutting edge of that, because we need to make sure that our children are comfortable and that we're using it, because if we don't use the technology properly in our schools and in our universities, there's going to be a disconnect to the general society. We have to be responsible, and so therefore technology, and we have to be right there on the cutting edge with anything new.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. That will have to be the last word. I'd like to thank our witnesses for coming today. We will briefly suspend and come back in a few moments. All right, folks. We will call this 20th meeting of the Legislative Committee on Bill C-32 back to order. We have witnesses from 3 organizations, from Athabasca University, Troy Tate, and Rory McGreal, from the Canadian National Institute for the Blind, Kathy Moore, and from the Canadian Association of Disability Service Providers in Post-Secondary Education, Karen Coffey. So we will start with Mr. Tate, Mr. McGreal from Athabasca University for 5 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, members, thank you for inviting Athabasca University. We feel this is a very important event for us. I'd like to introduce Troy Tate, who's our Director of Government Affairs, and I'm the Associate Vice President Research at Athabasca University, and I'm also the Canadian UNESCO Commonwealth of Learning Chair in Open Education Resources. And that might explain, give you an idea of why I'm taking the position I am today. Athabasca University is Canada's open university. All our students are online. We have over 40,000 students in every province and territory of Canada in over 100 countries. So you can see how important it is for us that the internet, the use of the internet, and that copyright use on the internet and in a digital environment is absolutely essential to our existence, as it is for traditional universities who are more and more going online. There isn't a traditional university today that doesn't have a very large percentage of its content and its teaching and learning online. I'd like to remind members, and I was a bit discouraged by some of the comments this morning, copyright started not to conserve the right of authors. On the contrary, the first copyright law was a law for the encouragement of learning, and that's the point of view I'm coming from as an educator. Copyright is for encouragement of learning, and they thought that it would help learning if they gave authors certain rights, certain limited rights. And I can see it's being more and more morphed into just authors' rights, and people are forgetting the learning component. So I am pleased in this bill that we have added learning as part of the fair dealing provisions. And generally, we support the bill, and we're talking about some minor exceptions that will improve it and make it usable in a 21st century environment. E-books are becoming mainstream. Tablet computers are the way people are beginning to read. Last year, Amazon for the first time sold more e-books than they sold printed books. So we're talking about a different kind of world. However, have you read your license when you buy an e-book and the restrictions on it? Why is it becoming unfair to own a book when you buy it? What happened to the principle, you buy it, you get it? Now you buy your e-book and they say, yes, you can read it in Australia, you can, but don't highlight on it, you can't annotate on it, it's illegal to show it to your friends. There's so many restrictions on them that it's becoming impossible for us to use them in an online learning context. And this is what is driving us as a university to open education resources. So when you're talking about, oh, we're going to lose money from fair dealing, and we're saying, no, you're not, it's going to be the same. You're not going to lose money from fair dealing. The publishers, they're not going to lose money from fair dealing. They're going to lose money because they put restrictions and have digital rights, the technology protection measures, to make them unusable in an online learning context. And it'll force us to go more and more to open education resources. And we're doing that now. The state of Washington's going that way. They're not going to open education, the whole state. They're going to open education resources. California is moving in that direction. and they're doing it because the locks, they can't function using the new tablet computers and e-books and everything with the proprietary restrictions that are on them. So if you want to support the publishing industry, beware of unintended consequences. And there's a big unintended consequence here. You put the locks on, you're going to lose money because we can't use them in a learning environment. In online learning, we have to compare texts online. We cannot live with a license and with protection measures that control everything we do in infinite detail. We need it to be open and flexible so as we can use them in a variety of different ways. We want to be able to use e-books in a 21st century context with our students, and digital locks should not prevent legal uses that include fair dealing. And you say that this is a balanced law. No, it's not. There's no fair dealing in this law. If somebody can put a digital lock and then I can't break it, I can't access my fair dealing rights, my legal fair dealing rights. So don't say it's balanced. It isn't balanced. But it's very easy to make it balanced, is just say for any illegal purpose. That's all you have to do. It's been argued that these restrictions to the publishing industry.
We're going to have to let you get into that a little more in the questioning. We'll move along now to Kathy Moore.
Yes, thank you, Chair and members of the committee. We'd like to thank you for this opportunity to speak to you today, but I have to say that for a moment I was very pleased to think that Roy was perhaps going to become a colleague as a member of the CNIB. I think we'd be honored to have you. Anyway, I'm here today representing the CNIB and specifically a service that we provide called the CNIB Library. This is a library that has been in operation since 1918, since the inception of our organization, and it's a library that provides library materials in accessible format or alternate formats. So the formats that you'd be the most familiar would be Braille or audio, but the audio, of course, these days can be audio streaming, it can be a CD, it can be a downloadable file, et cetera, so we've, of course, expanded. We're one of the largest producers of alternate format material. For library purposes, we are the largest in Canada, but I certainly want to acknowledge my colleague on the other side and the educational resource centres in this country that are also producing alternate format for their students. It's absolutely essential. In 2008, CNIB submitted 3 recommendations to the Copyright Reform Committee. It's hard to believe it's now 2011. But we want to provide you with at least some encouragement that 3 of our recommendations that we had made, 2 out of the 3 really have been addressed. So I just want to briefly put, of course, a couple of provisos around that, but just describe. We had recommended to clarify the language of Section 32.1, and I should mention that what is pertinent to CNIB in the production of alternate format for persons with perceptual difficulties is obviously Section 32.1 around exemptions to copyright infringement. So the language of 32.1 has been clarified. We're very pleased with that. Thank you. Our 3rd recommendation was around digital locks and technical protection measures, and we are cautiously encouraged by the recommendations that have been made in that there is now an acknowledged exemption or ability for the production for persons with perceptual disabilities or on behalf of persons with perceptual disability, pardon me, that there is an acknowledgement that circumvention is required and permissible, and the tools in order to circumvent a TPM are permissible. Now that's good, but that is, and of course we're more pleased with that than to be prohibited by that, but that does not in any way address the issues of the broader community, the educational community. So good first steps, but ideally, if we can work out a business model, and again, that's not the role of this committee, but so that it would allow publishers to be circulating files that are in fact in an accessible format, in a format that doesn't require circumvention, it would dramatically increase our ability to produce alternate format books. The second recommendation that we made, and I just want to finish by saying this, in the import and export clause in 32.1, it has been, again, an improvement. There is an acknowledgement we need to bring books in. Why produce Harry Potter 19 times across the English-speaking world when one production and then exchange back and forth is what we're looking for? One of the pieces, though, right now that is very problematic for us, it's very small in comparison to some of the other issues, but that the requirement of the producing institution to actually establish the citizenship of the rights holder, although it seems very small, is actually very difficult for us to do. It would require more resources, more staff, and it just is difficult and time-consuming, and really takes away from the very limited resources we have to do what we're doing, which is produce and run a library. So if another organization, rather than the actual reproducer or reformatter of material, could be identified as, in, for example, Access Copyright, as the organization needing to establish and just hand over the information in terms of citizenship. Is this person Canadian citizenship, Canadian citizen, refugee, etc. So I think I'll conclude there, and thank you again for the opportunity.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll now move to Karen Coffey for 5 minutes.
Good afternoon. On behalf of the Canadian Association of Disability Service Providers of Post-Secondary Education, CASB would like to thank the Legislative Committee for the invitation to appear today. CASB is a national group of professionals committed to the ongoing creation of accessible, equitable, and inclusive post-secondary learning environments for students with disabilities. The CASB membership includes disability service providers from colleges, technical institutions, and universities, as well as Anglophone and Francophone professionals. Across Canada, students with print disabilities, such as those who are blind or have reading disabilities, have limited access to textbooks and course materials that are readily accessible to them. During the last decade, there have been major advances in assistive educational technologies for people with disabilities, such as screen readers that can take a digital file and read it aloud to a student who cannot see the written word or is unable to comprehend the written word due to a severe reading disability. This technology opened opportunities for students with perceptual disabilities, which makes up the single largest group of students with disabilities in Canada's colleges and universities. Students are now able to utilize sophisticated text-to-voice software programs that can convert digital text into formats that allow a student to listen to their textbooks and required course material. Many provincial student loan programs already recognize the value of this technology to students with disabilities, and as a result, students who qualify for student loans may qualify for grants to purchase the necessary software and hardware which are required to access the digital formats of their course material. However, the hardware and software does them little good if they can't access the digital materials required, such as an electronic version of a textbook. Unlike their non-disabled peers, a student with a perceptual disability cannot simply go into their college bookstore and purchase an accessible copy of a required text. As a result, they become dependent on disability service providers to undergo the labor-intensive process of trying to convert a print copy of a textbook into a format that meets their needs. This process can take weeks, resulting in the student falling behind in their studies as they wait for textbooks in a format that they can actually use. In the case of text provided by publishers, students must rely on permissions from the publishers to obtain text in alternate format. They also must rely on disability service providers to assist in obtaining those texts. As publishers, citing concerns about copyright, will not provide alternate format text directly to students. Some publishers make excellent supports available, and students receive the alternate format copies of information. In other cases, the alternate format may take weeks to reach the student, and some are not available at all. When manually scanning is necessary, students must purchase a print textbook, cut the spine of the book to allow for scanning, and then physically scan the page to allow for the translation of a screen reading program. The scanned information must then be edited for accuracy, as the electronic translation process is not always accurate. Across Canada, disability service providers struggle to keep up with the many requests for scanning and editing text. Some post-secondary institutions, especially those in rural areas, do not have the staffing, the expertise, or the equipment to support students in scanning and editing all of their required readings. The Government of Canada must insist publishers make text and materials readily available to students with disabilities. Ideally, students with disabilities would purchase their alternate format text from the bookstore in the same manner other students purchase print textbooks. Furthermore, we urge the committee to include clear legal provisions that will require publishers and producers of print and non-print instructional materials sold and used in Canadian institutions to provide structured e-text files of those instructional materials to institutions upon request and in a timely manner. We see the legal thrust of the proposed law on copyright placing the burden of providing access to e-text files upon those responsible for creating and marketing the instructional materials in the first place. Students with disabilities are not asking for a free ride when it comes to textbooks. They are willing to purchase their textbooks just like every other student. What they're asking for is the right to be able to go into their local university or college bookstore and buy the textbooks that are accessible to them at the same time as their peers. Without this right, students with perceptual disabilities will continue to face barriers to what should be a fair and equitable Canadian education.
All right, thank you very much. We'll now move to questioning, and we'll go to the Liberal Party, Mr. McTeague,
thank
for
you, Chair.
7 minutes.
Yeah, I may not be using my 7 minutes, but if I do, I apologize in advance. Ms. McGreal, thank you very much, and witnesses for being here today. This may be our last round, but I'm sure we'll come back to this at some point, hopefully after the election. I'm wondering if I could get from you, Mr. Tate, or yourself, Ms. McGreal, your position here with respects to fair dealing. I just want to parse out what your position is, recognizing, of course, the unique nature of your university. But I understand that you have worked with, or at least shared some positions with, the Association of Colleges and Universities, which was here, Universities and Colleges, that was here just a couple of weeks ago. Just like to get a little bit more detail from you on that. I didn't really hear from your comments something about your position.
Our position follows from the AUCC position and even CMC. We like the amendments, including education and satire and parody, and we like the idea that we'll be following the 6 factors named by the Supreme Court, and we'd just like to be able to avail ourselves of it. But if somebody puts a lock on, there are no fair dealing rights, so I don't even know how we can even talk about fair dealing rights if you can put a lock on and take them all away from us. It doesn't make any sense.
Your concern really then is about access in this case.
Yeah,
I take it
it's
more than money.
The fair dealing as it stands is in this law is very good. I think you've stricken the right balance. As I said, they're just very moderate improvements to the law that we're suggesting.
Would you have a problem then if an amendment, because of course we're dealing with access as it relates to the addition of education in terms of fair dealing, which the bill proposes, would you agree, or would you consider that it would be considered unfair dealing, to use that term, if it has a negative impact on the market for our work? Would that be something you would look at?
There won't be a negative effect on the market. I think what's happening is, and too many people in Canada, they're focusing on the IP economy, and particularly the copyright economy. If you'd wake up, smell the coffee, you'd see that a much bigger economy is the fair dealing economy. And you have like web hosting companies, search engines, software developers, device manufacturers, news agencies. All of these depend on fair dealing and a robust fair dealing law. And a recent report put out by the United States said that it's bigger than the IP economy, and it's way bigger than the copyright economy. So if you're talking about effects on the market, we should be opening up the fair dealing economy, because that is the big economy, not the IP economy. Excuse me, I shouldn't say IP is big, but both are big. And the future is going more and more to the fair dealing economy. If you look at the industries that depend on fair dealing, they're growing much faster than the IP economy.
What if an amendment that said something would be considered unfair if there was a collective society that existed for works? Would you have trouble with that particular amendment?
If what? Sorry?
If exists a license from a collective society for these kind of works, the market, for instance, or someone who is a property right holder or a holder of a particular copyright, would you have any difficulty with suggesting that fair dealing would exempt, or you would ignore someone who had such a license?
I don't see how it would. I mean, fair dealing is very restrictive. You can't do a great deal with it, but what you can do is really important.
Yeah, Mr. McGreal, we're concerned about what fair dealing means, because now education is much broader than it was once defined. In fact, I think even the Supreme Court has made very clear in its decisions, and I think you'll be familiar with this, that there's no set test as to whether dealing is fair will depend on the facts in each case, which is why I'm interested, because if this is a very broad definition that's been given, the courts have said that they want to be relatively restrictive, but have defined it in a way that I think leaves it very nebulous. This is why we're trying to get from you what your take is on this kind of thing, whether or not you would see certain things as fair under education and certain things as unfair. But I thank you for that anyways. Yes, Mr. Garneau had a question here, because I think you got into IP, but I'll let him handle it. Thank you, Mr. McGreal.
Thank you, Mr. McGreal. I just want to understand one thing. You are talking about digital locks, and I want to be clear on whether you're saying we shouldn't have digital locks at all, or it's all right to have digital locks, but we must allow circumvention for non-infringing or illegal purposes.
I support digital locks. If you want to use digital locks, go ahead. That's fine, but don't take away my rights in order to assert your right. If you want to put up a fence on your property and it goes over my right-of-way, I would like to have the right to open the fence, open the gate.
Just wanted to clarify that with you. You're in line with most people.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll move to Bloc Québécois. Madame Lavallee for 6 minutes.
Ms. Lavallee, you have 7 minutes. Well, since this is probably the last time I'll be speaking as part of this legislative committee, I would like to say that I find it unfortunate, the Bloc Québécois finds it unfortunate to see this bill die on the order paper. About a month ago, we offered the Minister of Industry and the Minister of Canadian Heritage to pass this bill, and we requested from the minister, from both ministers, to reinsert in the bill the income for artists through updating of private copyright by removing the education exemption and reinserting the royalties for broadcast mechanicals. And we cannot support this bill without reinserting or reintroducing those lost income for artists. We find it unfortunate that the government preferred reducing income for artists, and rather than adopting a bill to fight illegal piracy and copying, and to clarify the situations that you've set out to us this morning. With regard to your presentation this morning, Mr. McGreal, you said you referred to the first Copyright Act. You're an academic, and so you're responsible for research, and no doubt your research has led you to examine what the Queen of England had said, and the whole context when that first Copyright Act was passed. And you might remember that at the time, it was a time when publishers and printers made use of manuscripts and printed them willy-nilly with any regard to the authors. And the authors at the time wrote novels or were also academics and scientists. And we're talking about Europe during the 18th century. And scientists were developing their research. And the Queen of England wanted to, of course, educate people, as you said. But she instituted that legislation. She was the first to do so, and it was a kind of a revolution at the time, because finally rights were given to authors. She realized that authors, scientists, or writers no longer want to share their works with printers or publishers because they would amend their works and did not pay, or very little, and they simply acquired those works. And the Queen of England based her legislation on the philosophy of John Locke. John Locke, who said something very important, that men own their intellectual property. That is to say that creation belongs to creators. Products do not. When you talk about rights, you have to put your rights in perspective with the rights of creators. When you buy a book, you're not buying the book, the novel. You're buying the right to read it on the support that you wish. Of course, and then you read the book. But the work still belongs to the creator. And in the same way, we have to address e-books. The e-books, the work belong to their creators. And the e-book is a more modern medium. But basically, the principle remains the same. The work belongs to the creator, and we must respect the work of creators if we want to develop our culture. We want to develop both Canadian and Quebec cultures. And if we want our culture to develop and creators to continue to produce works. And so I believe it's not a problem of access. The problem of access at university, I believe it's one where we have to pay. If you want to have a second e-book, I mean, you could very well have one. You could also obtain a copy, a print copy, and pay a license right through Access Copyright and have access to that information. There are a number of ways that you can have access to information on e-books or on print copies. But you need to have an authorization from the author, and you have to pay the author who created that work, and who, both whether it be a scientist or a novelist.
If I could respond, one of the a recent survey, and there's been a few of them in this vein, of students using e-books, and they complain they'd rather have the paper book, and the reason is because of the restrictions that are put on them. There are all kinds of restrictions, and you can pay all the money you want, you still have these restrictions, and the restrictions interfere with the educational process, and that's the problem. Now, to go back to your historical one, I'm afraid I have to respectfully disagree with you. Copyright did not create intellectual property. Intellectual property is a new word. It's been around since the 1960s. What it did was give authors the copyright, not le droit d'auteur. That's a French concept. It gave the a right to copy for a limited time. It created the public domain. It said authors can have their right for a limited time, 27 years, as long as it promoted education. As long as it promoted education. That was the origin of the law.
Apologies, Mr. McGreal, but I'd invite you to revisit your history books and to indeed reread the context in which the first Copyright Act was passed, and you will find that that was the first time when rights were given to authors.
First time that rights were given to authors and to the universities. It also gave rights to universities as well. And it didn't give rights, it limited their rights. And it wasn't for that, it was the owners, the printers owned it. As it is today, generally the authors and the creators, which I think is a misuse of the concept. Right now, the money goes to publishers, not to the creators. A small percentage goes to the creators. In those days, it was the printers, and it limited their rights. It wasn't brought in to give them rights. It was brought in to limit it for 27 years and to make sure that it expanded knowledge.
Thank you.
So,
Mr. Angus, for 7 minutes.
Well, this has been after the 100 and some witnesses we've had over, it seems we're all going back to first lessons here, so it's good that we have you here. Queen Anne's Law was the law to encourage the encouragement of learning, and so when we deal with fair dealing, we're finding ourselves back with that first principle. I'm interested, because of what's been said about fair dealing today. My colleague from the Liberal Party suggested that the ministers representing education in every province in Canada were trying to get something for free, that was their definition of fair dealing. I'm concerned also with my colleague from the Conservative Party who suggested all along with technological protection measures at the market. If you have a problem, take it up with the market. He's modified somewhat. He says, well, we can trust the minister. The minister would be all-knowing, all-wise, and if there's a problem, we can take it to the minister. He mentions that user rights are just kind of casually mentioned in the CCH, the Supreme Court decision, yet when I read the Supreme Court decision, it says, user rights are not just loopholes. Both owner rights and user rights should therefore be given fair and balanced reading that befits remedial legislation, and that this interpretation is to ensure that the user rights are not constrained. Is it not the role of the federal government to bring forth legislation that defines what fair dealing is so that we can move forward and get on with education and ensuring artists are protected?
Yeah, I would support that. It has to be fair. I'm not. I've been seemingly all on the user side, but I believe in protecting the rights of creators. I mean, this is very important. But the key point I want to make is don't take away our rights in order to protect your rights. And I mean, there's silly things in the law, like the you destroy your research paper within 5 days, or you put it in a filing cabinet. This is a big. I mean, this is ironic because the copyright collectives insist that we give them their information digitally. But they want us to take our research papers, print them out, and put them in a filing cabinet. Nobody does that anymore. Like, what is that law about? I mean, it's just absolutely absurd.
Well, I want to go to the sense of two-tier set of rights that are being created, and whether or not that will, I doubt that even passes a court test. That you can define rights in legislation, but that they don't exist in the digital realm where everything is moving. I'm concerned because with the technological protection measures, whether, again, the law of unintended consequences, as much as we want to protect property from being unfairly ripped off and put on ISO hunt, but in terms of education, whether or not it will have a huge impact. And I'm looking at the state of California, and you'd mentioned them, that they're putting $500 million in the next 4 years to create online, accessible, open education resources that will be available to anyone using the internet. Whether or not the move in the United States with people to get around the technological protection measures by creating open education, would that encourage something like the University of Athabasca to start using those open education materials and perhaps in the end leave many of our national and regional publishers in the lurch if we're still under the technological protection regime?
The move is already underway. We are committed to moving to open educational resources, and quite a few universities are following in our lead already. This has started, but it's big in the States. The state of Washington has gone to open education resources. California is going. President Obama put in, I think it's, what, $200 million for the creation of open education resources. And again, one of the main the main impetus to this is the digital locks, is that we just you can't run a modern university online with all these restrictions. And we're negotiating with our publishers, and we give millions of dollars to publishers. I hope that the creators get some of that money, but we give millions, and we give millions to the copyright collectives as well. And we just want to make sure that we can do with the material what needs to be done for learning. And you can't do it if you put all these restrictions on. We have students in Australia. We have DVDs. They don't work in Australia. Like, what are you talking about? Like, the world is getting smaller. They're putting in all these restrictions, and they're trying to control us. You can have this book, but you can't do this. You can't do that. You can't do this other thing. You can't show it. It's an offense to show it to your wife. The book, like, read those licenses. They're so restrictive that we just can't work with them, and it's going to destroy them. And this is the unintended consequences. And I've said in a few forums, well, bring on the digital locks, lock everything away, because I'm the chair of Open Education Resources, and I'm promoting the use of them, and I think there couldn't be a better promotion. And if you think you're defending the copyright industry by making it more and more restrictive, I respectfully suggest that you're not doing it, that the unintended consequences are going to come.
Madame Moore and Madame Coffey, I'm interested in hearing from you again in what it means on the ground. Again, I'd mentioned in the earlier session, my daughter went through university and went through high school and grade school fighting pretty much every step of the way to get access. She, in her last year in university, she met with another number of students who had perceptual disabilities. And she asked them what they did when they were confronted by a teacher or professor who simply wasn't interested in accommodating them. And in every single case, the student dropped the course. My daughter didn't. She actually would take him to the Human Rights Commission, and that's how she got through school. But she was shocked that she said if it wasn't absolutely easy for the teacher or professor, they simply refused. So when you add the extra burden of being able to access materials in a timely manner to participate in a course, how do you think that affects students who are trying to go to post-secondary education or even in high school to get where they need to go?
Well, I'll start and Karen can finish. What happens is that typically a person with a disability, a perceptual disability, ends up taking longer at university because they're waiting for their books. So they have to work so they often take part-time classes. And it's not disability related all the time. It's often simply resource related. So it takes longer to get through university. It's more demanding. Their marks aren't as high because they've started reading the material in October and everybody else started in September. So it creates an uneven playing field. So the more complicated it becomes to produce alternate format, and technical protection measures certainly complicate things, the longer it takes to get books to kids, whether they be books or course packs or whatever, get them to kids the same time as their non-disabled peers are getting them.
And certainly these students are at a disadvantage from the get-go. They really have to start planning well in advance to try to get their books in an accessible format. And it is extremely labor-intensive. And there was a research study done out of Dawson College in Montreal that said that for every week that they didn't have a textbook, their grade mark went down 1 letter grade for each week. So oftentimes, by the time these materials are readily available to them, the course is finished. And it's completely unfair. It's completely unfair. There's no reason why they should not be able to go into their bookstore and buy an electronic copy of the textbook just like their peers do. But it certainly holds them at a severe disadvantage. and the wonderful advances in educational technology that are helping so many other students with disabilities are actually putting up additional barriers to students with perceptual disabilities who can't access digital files.
Thank you. We'll move to Mr. Braid for 7 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to all of our witnesses for being here this morning. Start with yourself, Mr. McGreal, if I could. You're the Associate Vice President of Research at Athabasca. What's your academic background in?
Computer technologies in education.
Okay, excellent. And when was Athabasca University first established?
1972.
Okay, so you've seen this transition to the digital age, and you've obviously needed to have your mandate of online and distance education unfold and move with the transition to the digital age.
Yes.
Quite obviously. And do you see advantages of Bill C-32 in further assisting the move to the digital age within the context of
Absolutely.
online?
I think it's a good bill. I'm just talking about minor amendments. I mean, one of them, I think it's in Clause 30 about recognizing that distance education is the equivalent of classroom education. This is really important for us.
Absolutely.
So, yes, I do. I support the bill. I mean, it's just some very small things that just don't seem to make sense to me.
Understood. So how does the addition of education to fair dealing help Athabasca fulfill its mandate of providing online and distance education, just briefly?
Sorry, how does what?
How does the addition of education to fair dealing help Athabasca University fulfill its mandate?
Well, I think it gives it clarity, though. So right now, it's just our researchers can avail themselves of fair dealing, or so we think. And if you add education, then we can use it in a learning context. You know, we wouldn't feel guilty about moving from one website to another with students, with sharing limited amounts of material, and taking advantage of the fair dealing rights available in a distance education scenario, because before we were in a limbo. It doesn't really, we didn't know what, you know, are we legal, are we not legal,
right. What? Okay, so that clarity is critically important. Lastly, you spoke earlier in response to a previous question about this notion of a fair dealing economy. Could you just elaborate a little bit on that? What is the fair dealing economy, and why is this so important?
The recent report, if you look up fair use and the digital economy in the U.S., you'll probably find it, or I can put it for you. But it's about a $2.2 trillion economy as compared to the IP economy, which was around the same $2.2 trillion. And it's all these industries that I mentioned, like web hosting companies, search engines, software developers, device manufacturers, news agencies, et cetera, et cetera. They all use the fair dealing, and they're stronger in the United States because fair use is a broader concept than fair dealing. But we have all of these industries. They're growing in Canada. I'd like to see a study in Canada of it, because I think people would be shocked. People are putting their blinkers on and saying, we've got to protect IP, we've got to protect IP. And I agree with them. I agree with them.
So do I.
We've got to protect IP. But there's another economy that depends on fair dealing, and it's just as powerful and just as important for us all.
Thank you. Thank you.
And not only that, it's the right thing to do.
Great. Ms. Moore, thank you very much for being here today. I have a CNIB office in my riding of Waterloo, and I'm very familiar with the important and the valuable work and the services that you provide. C-32 clarifies the rights of persons with perceptual disabilities, as you've concurred as well. Mm-hmm. Could you just briefly explain why that's so important, and secondly, what the practical day-to-day uses are of the exceptions that we've provided for in terms of alternate formats?
The Section 32 is it really needs to be understood as an interim measure. The context is that it's interim. What it means is that it allows associations working with persons with perceptual disabilities, which are typically nonprofit or under-resourced, very little private industry there, unfortunately, to be able to afford in CNIB's case, to have a library that has 86,000 titles, to be able to do all of the manipulation, etc., required in order to create an alternate format of that material, house it, store it, deliver it, host it on a web, to be able to afford that without having to incur the additional expense of paying royalties. Now, we buy the books. I want to be clear there. But we have the option of being exempt from buying more than one copy, et cetera, et cetera. So, but in a perfect world, in a world that would work much better and really increase the equity between the availability of accessible library materials versus regular print materials, or the print versions, be they digital, because right now there's about 10% that's available in alternate format through a library service, either ours or Quebec's or otherwise. So a perfect world would be publishers that were able to work out a business model that worked for them, that worked for the rights holders, outside of the framework necessarily of legislation, that allowed for the production of accessible files, master files, or whatever, that we could simply receive, or, even better, that publishers simultaneously produced accessible alternate format along with their mainstream format. In fact, the two become one, so that mainstream format becomes alternate format at the same time. And there are examples of that. Technologically, we're moving there. Technologically, in terms of, and it's not the material itself, but the device to use it, the iPad tablet, and I have no stocks in Apple.
Or the RIM playbook, which will be
or the RIM playbook,
released in
we
just
haven't
a matter
seen it yet.
of weeks.
We haven't seen it yet. Unfortunately, I have stock in neither. The Apple tablet comes with an opportunity or an ability to make the print as large as you need it, but also a built-in screen reader, so that for someone who's not using print at all but is using auditorially, they're able to access the material on that tablet. Generally speaking, it's there. Mainstream, there's nothing special, there's nothing extra, there's no exemption. So the context of Section 32 at this point is it's an iterative step, but it's not the ideal, and it's certainly, we hope, eventually not we don't stop there.
Great.
I'd like to thank our witnesses for being with us today. I think your presentations were excellent, and I know the committee appreciated it. If, in fact, this is the last meeting of our committee, I want to thank the committee members for all of their hard work. It's been a pleasure acting as your chair. I think we've had some good meetings. And if, in fact, it is the end of this Parliament and there is a future bill on this topic, then hopefully the testimony that this committee has received will be received by a future committee. So thank you to all committee members. Meeting adjourned.